Hey everyone! In this video I'll show you how to make this tie-up crop top. It can be tied up 2 different ways, all the way around to the front, or you can just tie it in a bow at the back, and you can also wear it with a top underneath if you want it to be a bit more modest. I'm making this top in a size small, but it's easily adjustable for size, and I show you how to do that in the video, as well as provide centimetre and inch measurements. As always, if you have any questions, please leave them down below and I will try to get back to you. Also, please don't be afraid by the length of the video. I know it's long, but it's not because it's difficult or it takes a long time. I just explained everything in a lot of depth. I think that it would be fine for someone who is fairly beginner as long as you know a few of the basic stitches. For this project, I used about 200 grams of 8-ply cotton yarn, a 4mm hook, stitch markers, a darning needle and scissors. You may also want a small button, but it's not required as I show you 2 different ways to make it. Just before we get stuck into the pattern, I wanted to show you the columns for this project just so it makes sense for the sizing. So all of the sizes in the size guide that I've given are going to have the same number of columns. So these little dashes here are signifying the chains. So in the top you've got double crochets and then you've got the chains. So each of the clear non-lined columns is a double crochet and then the one with the lines is the chains. So every size is pretty much going to be adding 1 extra double crochet to each of these, so it's going to get wider and wider. And I just wanted to show you, this is the 3XL, so you can see that the columns are doubly as wide as the small, rather than it actually adding more columns. If you want to add more columns, you definitely can, and I've provided the centimetre and inch measurements so that you can do that if you want to. But if you're following the pattern and the size guide, you're going to be doing the exact same number of columns, they're just going to get wider. And that's the same with the back panel. So there's the back panel for the small and the back panel for the 3X large. Still got the same number of columns, they're just getting wider. And just in case you're deciding what you want to do, I did a little swatch of what the pattern looks like for the 3XL. So this is with double the amount of double crochets as the one that I've made. So you can see, I mean, I've only done a couple of rows, but that's about how wide the columns are, and then you've got your chains that are going to go up from there. So hopefully that helps you decide how you want to go about this. But either way, I've got the centimetre and inch measurements, so you can definitely do it a different way. But if you're following the stitch count that I've given, this is how it's going to turn out. And if you're making a medium, large, any size in between, then the columns are going to be somewhere in between these two, or smaller if you're making a smaller size. So now I'll get into the pattern. I am going to start with the back panel and show you the stitch that we're going to use for the majority of the top, and then I will go into the front panel after that. But the back panels are narrower, so it's a bit quicker to explain the stitch that way. So I'm going to make a slip knot and do my chain. These are the number of chains that you will need to do depending on the size that you're making, as well as the centimetre and inch measurement. So for me, making a size small, I'm going to do 31 chains. However, if you decide that you want to make this top with a different size hook and size yarn, and you want to follow the centimetre and inch measurements, you will need to work out how many chains you need to do in this first row to make all of the columns line up. So I'll also put up a picture of what the finished pattern of the top looks like. We've got columns of double crochets and columns of chains. So to work that out, I've put this equation up on the screen, and you'll just need to do the number of chains that you need for the centimetre or inch measurement that you're using, then +1, and you'll need to divide that by the number of columns that you want. If you're doing it the same pattern as my top, then you can divide the back panel by 4 and the front panel by 8, but if you want a different number of columns, that's fine. So then that will give you the number of stitches that you will have for both the double crochet column plus those chains next to it. So if you minus the chains, which is the equivalent of 3, you'll end up with how many double crochets you need to do between the gaps. So for me, that's 5. Hopefully that makes sense, but I'm happy to help you out in the comments if it doesn't. So I've got my chain of 31, and I am not going to stitch into those first 3 chains. That is going to count as our first double crochet. So skipping the first 3 chains, I'm going to go into the 4th chain from the hook, and I'm going to do a double crochet. So for that, we're going to yarn over, insert into that 4th chain along, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Now I'm going to do a double crochet into the next stitch, so yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. So now you can go ahead going down the rest of the row, doing 1 double crochet into every chain, and when you get to the end, join back in and I will show you the next row, which will be the first row of the main pattern that we're going to do for the rest of the top. And I'm just doing my last double crochet. So now the number of stitches that you should be 2 less than the number of chains that you did. So I did 31 chains and now I have 29 stitches because these first 3 chains count as 1 stitch. So now I'm going to chain up 3, and we're always going to be chaining up 3 at the end, and it's going to count as our first double crochet for the next row. So this will always count as double, and we need to make sure that we don't go into that first stitch because this is technically the stitch for that first stitch. So we're always going to be skipping that first stitch there. The stitch that I'm using for this top is the V chain stitch, and I believe that's by Create and Crochet. So now we're going to start on the double crochet section for this pattern, and like I said at the start, every size is going to have a different number of double crochets that they need to do between the columns of chains. So for me, making a size small, I need to do 5 doubles between each lot. However, this first chain of 3 is counting as the first stitch, so I only need to do 4. So you'll just do 1 less than the number of doubles that you'll need to do for the rest. Up on the screen is the number of doubles that you'll need to do depending on the size that you're making, as well as the centimeter and inch measurements. And just remember that that's not including the 3 chains at the start, so the first column in every row will have 1 less stitch than that. And also here are the centimeter and inch measurements for the full width of the column, so the double crochets and the chains, in case you need that. So I'm going to go ahead and do a double crochet into that next stitch. So we're going through both loops, the front loop and the back loop. We're going to go through both. So yarn over, insert through both loops, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, and yarn over, pull through 2. So I've got my first double crochet and I'm going to do 3 more. So now I've got 5 stitches here because we're counting the chains as a stitch. So that's my first lot of 5 stitches. So now we are going to chain up 5. These chain sections are the same for all sizes, so no matter what size you're making, you can follow this part. Once you've chained 5, we're going to go back to doing the double crochets, but we need to skip 3 of these stitches in the previous row. So I'm going to skip 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to do a double crochet into that 4th stitch along. So into that 4th stitch, I'm going to do a double crochet, and then I'm going to go ahead and do 4 more double crochets to give us another lot of 5. And you'll just do as many double crochets as you need to do for your size. And 5. So now I've got 5 double crochets, and I'm going to do the same thing again. Chain up 5. And skip 3 of the stitches from the previous row. So 1, 2, 3, double crochet into that 4th stitch along. In case this is a bit confusing, just to be clearer, the chain section is the same no matter what size you're making. The only change is how many double crochets you do. So for all sizes, you've got those 5 chains with the 3 gaps from the previous row, and then you'll just do as many doubles as you need to do. Another chain of 5. And into that 4th stitch with another double crochet. And you need to make sure that you do stitch into that last stitch, which is the chains from the previous row. So from the very first row that we did, this is the chain double crochet. So you also need to do a double crochet into the top of that chain as well. So now I've got my 5 double crochets. So now we can chain up 3. This stitch pattern is a 2-row repeat, not including that first row of just the plain double crochets, but this is 1 row of the pattern and doing the second row, and then we're going to repeat this row with the next row that I'm about to show you. So once you've learned these 2 rows, it'll be pretty easy because it's just going to be repeating 1 2 1 2. It's always going to be the same. So now I'm going to do exactly what we did at the start of the other one. I'm skipping that first stitch because that's where the chains are, and I'm going to the next stitch along with a double crochet, and then I'm going to do 3 more so that we have 5 stitches in this section. And you'll just need to do the same number of double crochets that you did for those sections in the previous row, so however many you need for your size. And now I'm going to chain up 3. 1, and I'm going to stitch into that middle stitch from the very first row we did. So those 2 are going to remain free, and I'm going to do a single crochet into that middle stitch. So insert through both loops of the middle stitch, and also you always want to be coming in front of this bar. So we'll turn around and go back the other way, but then we're going to be coming back. You always want to go in front and not behind this bar. So in front, and I'm going to do a single crochet into that middle stitch, and now I'm going to chain up 3 again. So back to the double crochets. So into the top of that first double crochet from the previous row, I'm going to put 1 double crochet into each of the previous stitches. So it's always going to be groups of the same number of double crochets. So for me, making a small, that's 5, and the chains is always going to be the equivalent of 3 stitches for all the sizes. So the pattern's starting to form. This one will eventually be pulled up, and it's going to have a little V like that. So now I'm going to repeat that again, chain up 3, go in front of that bar, into that middle stitch that's free at the bottom, single crochet, and chain up 3 again. Now back to the double crochets, so 5 double crochets, 1 into each of the previous double crochets from the previous row. And one more time, I'm going to chain up 3 into that third stitch of the previous row, single crochet, chain up 3, and now back to the 5 double crochets, remembering to do your last double crochet into the chains that are counting as a double crochet. So I've got 4, and I'm going to do my last one into the chains. Great, so now we chain up 3 again, turn around, and we're back to doing what we did in that first row of the pattern or the second row of the top. So this one with that straight bar, we're going to do another straight bar again. So it's always going to be the 5 chains, and then the next row is going to be the 3 chain, single crochet, 3 chain, and it's always going to be that way. So skipping that first stitch because we've already got the chains, I'm going to do 4 double crochets, and 4. So now we've got our 5 stitches, and now I'm going to chain up 5. Yarn over and back to the double crochets. So keep doing the double crochets and then 5 chains, double crochets, 5 chains, all the way until you get to the end of this row. Then join back in, and I will show you the next row, which is exactly the same as the row previous to this one, except that we won't be going into the bottom of the top. We're going to be going around this loop here. So I will show you how to do that because that row is a little bit different, but this row that I'm currently doing now and the next row is going to be identical to all of the other rows from the top. So once you've done 4 rows with the pattern, you'll know what to do and you'll be able to keep going because it's going to be identical. If you are getting a bit confused, just watch this row and the next row again, because those are the ones that are going to be the ones that repeat. And I'm just doing my last double crochet into those chains and chain up 3 and turn. So now I'm doing my 4th row with the V chain stitch, or my 5th row in total for the top if you're going from the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and do my 4 double crochets as normal. So now I'm going to chain up 3, just like we did in the 3rd row here. So chain up 3, and I'm going to grab the first bar that we made, that first bar of 5 chains. So I'm going to go in front of this lot of 5 chains, and I'm going to grab the below lot of 5 chains, always going in front. Grab that, and I'm going to do a single crochet. And now I'm going to chain up 3. So we're back to the double crochets into those double crochets from the previous row. And just to show you what it's looking like, so we've gone past this lot of 5 because that's going to be caught up with the next time we do this stitch. So we've grabbed that first lot, and so that's what the pattern's going to look like. So I'll show you that again. So I've done my 5 double crochets, so I'm going to chain 3, go in front of that first lot of 5 chains, grab the below lot of 5 chains and do a single crochet, chain up 3 and back to the doubles. So go ahead and keep going down the rest of the row, doing that pattern, grabbing all of the chains from the first lot of 5 chains that we did. I will go through the 2-row repeat of the pattern again one more time, just in case it's a bit confusing, but otherwise if you reckon you've got it down, you can just go ahead and continue doing the 2-row repeat pattern until you have done as many rows as you need to do for your size. I'll put the rows up on the screen if you want to keep going, but if you want to see those 2 rows one more time, stay here and I will show you them now. So I'm just doing my last double crochet, chain up 3. So we've just done the 3 chain single crochet 3 chain row, so we're back to the 5 chain row. So I'm going to go and do my first 4 double crochets as usual. There we go. And now I'm going to do my 5 chains. Back to the double crochets. So go ahead down the rest of the row, doing double crochets followed by 5 chains until you get to the end. Then chain up 3, turn around as normal, and I will show you that next row one more time, and then you can go ahead until you have finished this bottom section of your back panel. This is both back panels. So this part up until the armhole is identical for both back panels, so it doesn't matter which one you're making. All right, and my last double crochet into those chains. Chain up 3, turn around, and we're going to do our doubles again. Got 4, and now we're going to chain up 3, go over the top of this first lot of 5 chains, grab the below lot of 5 chains and do a single crochet. Chain up 3, And now we're going to go back to the double crochets. So I will show you that one more time, and then we'll go ahead and finish off this section up to our armpit. And now I'm going to chain up 3, going over the top of that first lot of 5 chains, grabbing the second lot of 5 chains and single crochet, and now chain up 3 again, back to the double crochets. So you can just go ahead doing that 2 pattern repeat. So every first row of the pattern will be with the 5 chains, and every second row of the pattern will be with the 3 chains, single crochet 3 chains. So do that until you've done as many rows as you need to do for your size. These are also the centimeter and inch measurements. If you're using a different size hook and yarn, you'll need to do that many rows instead. So go ahead until you reach that point, then join back in, and I will show you what we're going to do for the armholes. And here is just a little swatch of what it should be looking like, and your columns will either be narrower or wider depending on your size. So now you should have done your 17 rows, or however many rows you need to do for your size, and that's counting from this first row. Up until this point, both panels are identical. So no matter which panel you're making, you're going to come up to this point exactly the same. So the difference is going to be for the panels. One of them is going to have, we're going to stop stitching into one of the side panels. So for the left hand panel, we're not going to be stitching into this side because this is where our left arm is going to be. And for the right hand panel, we're not going to be stitching into this row here because this is the side that the armhole is going to be for the right side. I'll show you both of them. We'll go through them both, but just so you know, if you wanted to, you could definitely just make the same panel twice, exactly the same. It does look a bit different on the other side, but only a little bit different. So if you didn't want to do the opposites, you could just make 2 of the exact same panel. It's not going to look that different. I just want mine to look exactly the same. So I'm going to do one with a decrease on one side and one with a decrease on the other side. So we're going to start off with the decrease for the left hand panel, so the one that's going to go on the left side of your back. So we're not going to stitch into this column of stitches here. That's if you're using the same number of columns that I am, and if you're using the measurements, this is how many centimeters or inches you will need to skip. So to do that, I've got my last stitch here, and I'm just going to chain up 1, turn around, and I'm going to put 1 slip stitch in those first 5 stitches, which is into each of the double crochets of that first column, however many you have for your size. So into each of those stitches, and you can go through both loops. It doesn't really matter for this one, but I'm going to go through both loops, and we're going to put 1 slip stitch into the stitches. So now I'm going to chain up 2, so 1, 2, and I'm going to do a single crochet into that loop from the bottom. Normally we wouldn't be grabbing this loop so early on, it would be with the next lot of rows, but we're just going to try and get it out of the way. So I'm going to do a single crochet and then chain up 2 again. And now I'm going to do a slip stitch into that first stitch. If you have more columns that you need to skip, you're just going to keep doing this until you've skipped as many as you need to. So you just do all of the slip stitches into the top of those double crochets and catch that little flyaway. For this pattern, I'm only skipping 1 column, so I don't need to do any more. So now I'm going to chain up 3 as normal. So that's going to be our first stitch for the rest of this row. So you can see we've kind of flattened out this section, and now I'm going to keep going as normal. So into that next stitch, I'm going to do a double crochet like normal, and I'm going to go down the rest of the row doing our rows like normal. So now we go back to the regular pattern that we were doing. So because the last row that I did the 3 chains and the single crochet, I'm back to the 5 chains. So I'm going to chain up 5 and keep going with the same pattern. When you get to the end, you're just going to chain up 3 as normal, turn around and keep doing the same pattern that we've been doing. If you need a reminder of how to do it again, you can go back and check what I showed you for this first part, but it's exactly the same. We're just going to have one less column now. If you're using the measurements, this is the width that the remaining part of the panel should be. So the bit that you're going to continue doing should be about this wide. So keep going until you've done 16 rows in this section for a size small, or this is how many rows you need to do for the other sizes. So I'm just going to keep going up, following this same pattern, excluding this one or however many panels you need to exclude on your side. So for me, I'm going to stop stitching into this column and I'm just going to continue with these 3. If you're following my size guide, then that'll be the same number for you. Your columns just might be a different width depending on your size. Once you've done as many more rows as you need to do in this section for your size, join back in and I will show you the next little section, which is going to be for our neckline. And then you can go ahead and make the other side, but I will show you the differences for the other panel. So I have done my 16 rows and you will have done as many as you need to do. And now we are going to leave a bit of room for a neckline. And the armhole is over this side, so we need to leave a neck hole on the opposite side. So that's the same for both panels. It's going to be on the opposite side. So what I need to do is join back in where I'm at row 16 for me, and I'm going to chain up 3, turn around, and I'm going to do the first little bit of this row as normal. So I'm going to do my 4 doubles. Last I did the 3 chain single crochet 3 chain, so I'm up to the 5 chain and back to the double. So I'm going to keep going down the rest of this row as normal, but I'm going to stop before I get to the end. I'm only going to stitch into the first 2 columns. So I've got 3 columns here with the 2 chains in the middle. So I'm going to stitch into the first 2 columns. And if you're using the centimeter and inch measurements, here is how wide this section should be for your size. So I'm just going to keep going until I get to the end of the point where I need to be stitching. So just go ahead and keep following the pattern as normal until you get to your last double crochet before we're going to stop. So I'm there now, and because we've got this little chain loose again, I'm going to do similar to what we did for the armpit. I'm going to chain up 2, grab that loop, do a single crochet, chain up 2, and join on to that first double crochet in that next series with a slip stitch. If you are leaving behind multiple columns here, then you'll need to keep doing these slip stitches and that little 2 chain single crochet that I just did until you get to the point where you are on your last column and you don't have any left. Then you can turn around and do slip stitches all the way back until where you need to start the next row for your neckline. Hopefully that makes sense, but you'll just need to make sure that you've skipped as many columns as you need to skip and that you're going to be stitching into as many columns as you need to stitch into. So I'm going to chain up 1, turn around, and we're going to go back doing 1 slip stitch into those 5 chains and single crochets. So I've got the 2 chains, I'm going to do a slip stitch into each, a slip stitch into the single crochet, and a slip stitch into the next 2 chains, and finally a slip stitch into that first double crochet that we've just done from the previous row. So slip stitch into the top of that and then chain up 3, and back to the regular pattern with the double crochets. So we've got 4 double crochets, the last row that we did had the 5 chains, so I'm back to the 3 chains, single crochet, 3 chains, and the double crochets again. So you'll just need to keep following this pattern until you've done as many rows as you need to do for your size. So these are all up on the screen, as well as the centimeter and inch measurements. For me, making a size small, I only have to do 2 rows in this section. So this is actually my last row. So I have just finished the back panel, and all of the sizes only have a couple of rows. So you might be doing a couple extra, but you don't have to do too many for the back panel. So feel free to add more rows if you want a lower neckline. Just make sure to add the same number of rows to all of the panels. So this is going to even up with the front panel. That's done now, and if you have the 5 chains remaining, don't worry, because we'll use that to stitch onto the front panel. If you want to though, if you have any hanging loose, you can go back along and do slip stitches and catch it up. So if you ended up doing a different number following the centimeter and inch measurements, just go back along doing the slip stitches and catch that in. But we will be stitching it to the front panel, so that'd only be if it was a bit further down. So now I have finished that back panel, and now I'll show you how to do the other side. Okay, so to make the right-sided back panel, you're going to need to go ahead up until you get to this point. So this is the first 17 rows. So go ahead until you've done that for the sides that you've made. Just copy what you did for the other one. And now this is where it differs. So for this one, the right-sided one, I need to skip this column on the side here. So I'm going to chain up 3 as normal, and I'm going to do the stitches into these first 3 lots. For me, it will be a different number for you, but these first 3 columns I'm just going to do as normal. So go ahead until you have made it almost to the end. For me, I need to leave just 1 free, so I'm going to do these 3. So join back in when you've left as many free as you need to leave. Okay, so I'm just doing my last double crochet into that second last column. So I'm just leaving this column free, but if you are leaving multiple columns free, you'll kind of do what we did for the other side, and you'll need to do this little bit that I'm going to do twice, and then you'll need to do the slip stitches and then keep going. So I'll show you what I mean. So similar to what we did to the other side, I'm going to chain up 2 and do a single crochet into that loop that we've left free. So single crochet, and now I'm going to chain up 2, and I'm going to do a slip stitch into that first stitch. So it is going to look a little bit different to the other side because we started at the top of a double crochet, which is higher than the slip stitch, but once we put the arm trim on it, it won't be noticeable. So now if you've only got this 1 column left, we're going to turn around and go back now, but if you have another column left on the side, you'll just need to continue putting 1 slip stitch into all of those stitches, and when you get to the end of this lot of 5, then you're going to do exactly what we did here, 2 chains, a single crochet and 2 chains, and then you'll turn around from there. So once you've gotten to the last one that you need to tie off, then you'll do this next little bit, which I've just done a slip stitch into that last stitch. And now I'm going to chain up 1, turn around, and I'm going to put 1 slip stitch into every stitch. So into each of the chains, so there's 2 chains, I'm going to put a slip stitch, then into the single crochet, I'm going to put a slip stitch, and the next 2 chains, I'm going to put slip stitches. So another 2, and then lastly, I'm going to put a slip stitch into that first stitch. So I've got my slip stitch into the top of that first stitch from that next lot. So now I'm going to chain up 3, and I'm going to pretend that this row is starting here. So you'll see it's a little bit bumpy, but we're going to be putting trim around the arm, so don't worry if you got a little bump, that will all even out. So now you can just go down the rest of the row, doing the pattern as normal. So I've got my other 4 double crochets to do, and then the last lot of stitches that I did was the 5 chains, so that means that I have to go back to the 3 chain single crochet 3 chain. So continue on with the pattern from there. If you're using the measurements, this is how wide this section of the panel should be, same as the other side. And keep going for this number of rows depending on your size. For me, making a size small, I'm going to keep going for the next 16 rows, but you just join back in once you've done as many rows as you need to do for your size. And we're just going to be stitching into these columns and excluding the ones that we did the slip stitches into. So keep going until you get up to the row that you need to do. Just like with the other panel, you will have done as many rows as you need to do since the armpit, which for me is 16 rows, making a size small. So after this armpit, I've got my 16 rows and you'll have as many as you need to do. So depending on which side you've chosen to do first, you may have already seen the neckline for the other side, but it's going to be exactly the same. So we've got our armpit on this side, which means we need our neckline on the opposite side. So because that's where my yarn is and my hook is, I'm going to start off with the slip stitches. If you're using the measurements, you may have a different number of columns to me, but if you're following my pattern, then we'll have the 3 columns with the 2 lots of chains. Now that I've finished that last double crochet, I'm going to chain up 1, turn around, and I'm going to put 1 slip stitch into every stitch of that previous row. So I'm going to put 1 slip stitch into those first 5 double crochets. And just like we did for the armpit, I'm going to chain up 2, grab that loose little 5 chains, single crochet, chain up 2 again, and slip stitch into that first double crochet from the previous row. So now if you have to skip more than 1 column, you'll just keep going with the slip stitches. So just do 1 slip stitch into all of those stitches and repeat this little process that we did with the single crochet. If you don't have to skip any more columns, then we're going to keep going and chain up 3, which is what you'll do if you're doing it on, say, the 3rd column. You would do your chain up 3 there and keep going. So now I'm going to chain up 3, and that's going to count as my first double crochet. So you can see we've now cut off this column, or as many columns as you need to, and I'm going to start with the doubles again, just like normal when we're starting off with the chains. And that last row that I did had the 3 chains, single crochet 3 chains, so I'm back to the 5 chains and doubles again. So you just need to keep doing this for as many rows as you need to do for your size. I'll put up on the screen how many rows you need to do. For me, making a size small, I only need to do 2 rows. So once I finish this row, I'll only have 1 row left. So this, even if you're making another size, there's not going to be many rows in this section. It's going to be a nice quick one. So now I'm back to my last row. So I'm just going to go back along, and we're back to the 3 chain single crochet 3 chain. So just keep going until you've done as many rows as you need to do in your size, and then we can fasten off our yarn. And I'm just doing my last double crochet into those chains from the previous row and fasten off. So you'll see that there is one little lot of 5 chains hanging loose, but that's fine because we're going to attach that to the front panel when we connect the panels together. So don't worry about that. If you ended up on a row that had more than one of these, you can do the 2 chain single crochet 2 chain just like we did there to collect it up if you've used a centimeter inch measurements, but don't worry too much because whatever is loose here, we can attach it when we attach the panels. For the front panel, it's going to be exactly the same as the back panels, so we'll do that first row of chains and then the double crochets, and then you'll need to do the pattern that we've been doing for the back panel, but it's just going to be wider. So these are the number of chains that you will need to do for your size, as well as the centimeter and inch measurements. And if you need to remember what stitches to do, just go back to the back panel and watch that, because it's identical. So the first row will be the doubles and then the patterns. So once you've done that first row of chains, this is the number of stitches that you will need to have for each size, and you will have 8 columns in total if you're following my pattern guide. Otherwise, use the centimeter and inch measurements like you did for the back panel. All of the timestamps will be in the description, marked as chapters, so you should be able to jump around between the panels. I've also put that equation back up on the screen, so if you're using the centimeter and inch measurements and you want to work out how many panels, it's the same equation before, but this time divided by the number of columns that you want to do for the front panel rather than half for the back panel. Once you know how many stitches you're doing, you're just going to go ahead and do the first few rows like we did for the back panel. So for me, making a size small, I did 17 rows, but this is how many rows you will need to do for your size. So go ahead and do exactly what you did for the back panel, just wider for the same number of rows, which I've put up on the screen now. Once you've done 17 rows, or however many rows you need to do for your size, your top should be looking a bit like this, and we're going to do some decreases now to give us a little bit of room for our arms. So the whole rest of the top, like the back panels, is going to be the exact same stitch. We're just going to do a decrease on either side. On each of the back panels we only have to do one armhole decrease, but because the front panel is just one big panel, we're going to decrease both sides. Go to where you ended, and now we're going to chain up 1, turn around, and I am going to put slip stitches into those first double crochets from the previous row. So into each of those I'm going to insert, yarn over, pull through, and pull through again. Then into the next stitch, insert, yarn over, pull through, and pull through again. So just do that for all stitches. This is basically to get our yarn to the spot that we need it to be in, with being as less visible as possible. So now I've done my 5 slip stitches, and you will have done however many you need to do for your size for that first column. And I'm going to chain up 2 and put a single crochet into that loop. Normally we would be pulling from one further below than that, but in order for this one to not be just free and hanging around, we're going to do a single crochet into it, and then I'm going to chain up 2 and slip stitch into that first double crochet. So you can see we've pretty much made a straight line going across. I've got my 5 slip stitches, chain 2, single crochet, chain 2, and then a slip stitch into the top of that double crochet in the next section. If you're using the measurements, you can just keep doing the slip stitches until you skipped as many columns as you need to, which will be the same as the back panel. But if you're following my size guide, we're only skipping 1 column. The column will just be a different width, depending on your size. Here is also the full measurement and stitch counts for the section that we are going to be stitching into. So this will be without the 2 sides, leaving room for our arms. So now I'm going to chain up 3, and we're going to go back to the normal pattern. So that's going to count as my first double crochet, like it has for the other parts where it's on the edge. So that's 1, and now I'm going to do a double crochet into the next 4 stitches. So it's going to be the exact same pattern as before. We've just shifted over where we're starting from. So now when we come back, we're going to stop here and keep going like normal, like we did for the other bit, and we're going to have this whole section missing basically for the arm. So that's 1 double crochet into each of those stitches. So just like we did for the bottom half of the panel, I'm going to go back to doing the pattern that we have for these. So the last chains that we did were ones to grab the other strand. So now I know I just have to do 5 chains across. So I'm going to chain up 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and going back to the double crochets, 1 into each double crochets of that previous row. So you can go ahead and continue on with this pattern until you get close to the other end, because we're going to skip the last lot of double crochets and chains on the other side as well. So it's going to be symmetrical. So go ahead continuing the usual pattern until you get close to the other end. Join back in and I will show you that next section. Okay, so now I'm back up to the other end and I just have my last double crochet to go, and I've left that last lot of the 5 doubles as well as the strands free. If you're using the measurements or the version with more columns, just make sure that it's symmetrical on both sides of the front panel. So we need to do the same thing that we did on the other side and make sure that this chain loop isn't flopping about. So similarly to what we did on the other side, I'm going to chain up 2, and we're going to put a single crochet into that chain loop, and I'm going to chain up 2 again. Now I'm going to slip stitch into that next double crochet. So now we have caught that chain loop and it's going to stay secured now. So I'm going to chain up 1. If you have more columns left over, you can just continue with the slip stitches like we did for the back panel. So I'm going to do kind of what we did before into the double crochets. I'm going to put a slip stitch into all of those chains and that single crochet. So I'm just going to go down the row. So you should have 5 slip stitches in total. So I'm going to slip stitch into those first 2 chains, slip stitch into the single crochet, and slip stitch into the next 2 chains. You could also cut your yarn and rejoin if you prefer to do that, but I find it easier to just do the slip stitches. It's not too bulky, and we're also going to put trim around the arm, so little lumps and bumps will be covered up, so don't worry too much if there's a bump there like with mine. So now I'm going to slip stitch into that first double crochet that we're back to and chain up 3. So that chain is going to count as our first double crochet again, and you can just continue going and doing the double crochets as normal. So the next 4 stitches I'm going to put a double crochet and continue on with the pattern. I've done my 4 double crochets, and that last row that we did had just the chains, so that means that we're going to need to do the single crochet into the below chain. So not this top one, the one below it should be free. So chain up 3, go in front of your work, grab that chain loop from below and do a single crochet. Now I'm going to chain up 3 again, and into the top of the next double crochet I'm going to do a double crochet. So yarn over and double crochet into that next double crochet. So exactly the same as before. We're going to continue the pattern of the double crochets, and then the 3 chains, single crochet, 3 chains, or if you're up to another row, you'll do the 5 chains. So just continue with the pattern as before, alternating between the 5 chains and the 3 chain, single crochet, 3 chain. When you get to the end, you're just going to turn around as normal and keep going. We're not going to stitch into this one anymore. So when you get to the end, treat this like you treated this edge. So it's going to go like that and keep going straight up on both sides, a little bit narrower to leave some room for our arms. So you'll just keep going with this pattern until you've done as many rows as you need to do for your size. For me, making a size small, I'm going to do 14 rows. So join back in once you get to that point. I just wanted to show this bit in case my explanation was a bit confusing, but we're just going to put 1 double crochet into each of those last 5 stitches as normal. Got 1, And then, like we used to have to do onto the edge, we're going to do our last double crochet into the chains. So into the top of the chains, which was counting as a double crochet, I'm going to put my last double. And now, like we normally did in the end, I'm going to chain up 3, turn around, and keep going, almost pretending that this is now the edge. Keep going until you've done as many rows as you need to do in your size, following the usual pattern. Okay, so I have just done my 14 rows and this is what it's looking like. So we've got the bottom here, the armholes, and then the top. So now what we're going to need to do is create a bit of a neckline. So to do that, we're going to be stitching into some of the edge columns, but not all of them. I'm going to be leaving 2 free in the middle. So I'm going to be stitching into the side 2 and leave the middle 2 free. But no matter how many columns you're stitching into, it's going to be the exact same process. You'll just need to do it for your number of columns rather than my number of columns. So I'll explain as we go. But I've just done my last double crochet over there, and I'm going to chain up 3 as normal. Turn around, and now into the first 2 columns I'm going to do the normal pattern. If you're using the measurements, each shoulder section should be about 1/3 of the width of the top where you're up to now. So my last row was with the single, so I'm just going to do chains and keep going. I'm just doing my last double crochet in that last column, so I'm not doing it the next lot of normal stitches into the next gap between the columns, because for these next 2 columns I'm going to stop stitching into them. So that's going to include the 3 column gaps around it. So you'll have 1 extra column gap that you need to deal with than the number of columns that you have, because there's always going to be 1 on either side. So just like we did for the armhole, I'm going to chain up 2 and do a single crochet into that last loose 5 chains, which normally we wouldn't be stitching into yet, but I don't want it to be hanging around. And I'm going to chain up 2 again and slip stitch into that next stitch. So now to make sure that we capture this column gap and this column gap and however many else you might have, I'm going to do slip stitches all the way along. We're going to do what we just did again, slip stitches all the way along, and then what we did again, and then stitch into those 2 as normal. So I'll show you what I mean. So all of the columns that you're going to skip, we're going to put slip stitches into. So I've got my 5 slip stitches, and now I'm going to chain up 2, single crochet into that 5 chain loop, and chain up 2 again. And now I'm going to do slip stitches again. So slip stitch into that first stitch. So we've got exactly what we did over here. We've just done it again. And now I'm going to slip stitch into the next 4 stitches. And I'm going to chain up 2 because I'm at the gap again, and single crochet and chain up 2 again. Now I'm going to slip stitch into that first stitch of the next lot. So keep going with that until you've covered all of your columns that we're no longer going to be stitching into. And now I'm going to go back to normal. So I'm going to chain up 3 and pretend that this is the start of the row. So I'm going to do my 4 double crochets and continue down the rest of the row as normal. So the last row had the single crochet in it, so we're going to chain up 5 just like we did on the other side, and I'm going to double crochet into that next lot. So you'll just keep going doing the regular pattern until you get to the very end of the row. No matter how many columns you have left, just keep going until you have none left and you've done your last double crochet into that chain row. Great, so I'm done, and it is a little bit hard to see because it's only one row, but we have one extra row on these edge columns, and I've got the slip stitches into this column, and we're going to be doing the trim around the neckline too, so don't worry, it'll smooth out. So now I'm going to chain up 3 as normal and turn around. If you're using the measurements, this is how wide each of your shoulder areas should be. If you're following my size guide, we only have 2 rows. So now I'm just going to do normal. So I'm going to do the 4 doubles and then continue on with the pattern. So just do this next row with the regular stitches into as many columns as you need to. And then I will show you the next part. So I'm going to chain up 3 as normal and grab that loop. And I'm going to do my 5 doubles into this next column, which is the last column for me. So once you get up to the last column for this row, and make sure that you do your last double crochet into those 3 chains, we are now going to just chain up 3, turn around and keep going. This is the number of rows that you'll need to do in this section for your size, as well as the centimeter and inch measurements. Just keeping in mind that we've already finished 2 rows in this section, so make sure that you're calculating that. And I'm on my last row, and I'm going to do my 3 chains, 1 single crochet as normal. You will notice that we're going to have this loop of 5 that's hanging free, but don't worry, we'll be stitching it to the back panel when we join them together, so don't worry about it for now. It's going to get caught up when we stitch the front and back panels together because it's going to be in the middle of the shoulder, so nothing to worry about. And I'm doing my last stitch, chain up 1 and pull a tail. So that is it. And that is going to be the front of our neckline. So I'm going to pull a tail that's going to be long enough to stitch up the front and back panels. And now we need to go back to the other side and finish that off. So because we started off on this side, we do have 1 row in our shoulder section. So we only need 3 more rows in our shoulder section for the other side, depending on your size. We went across this way and did the slip stitches, which means that if the stitches came back, they would be coming back this direction. So we're going to need to join our yarn on here rather than here to make sure that the stitches are facing the right way. So grab the end of your yarn, and I'm just going to make a little slip knot, put it on my hook, and join on the inside of this neckline. So I'm just going to do a slip stitch into the first stitch of the column that's part of our shoulder and not the front of our neck. So that last row from when we got the slip stitches here, so that last lot that you did before you did the slip stitches. And I'm going to join on and then chain up 3. So that'll be our first stitch again, and I'm going to go back to the normal pattern. So I've got my 4 doubles. So you can just go ahead for the next rows, and then we are going to do exactly what we did on the other side. Leave one of these little things free over here, and you can cut a tail again. So go ahead until you've done your 3 rows, or as many as you need to do for your size, making sure that it matches up with the other shoulder. And then we will be joining the front and back panels together. So join back in when you get to that point. So I'm just doing my last double crochet into those 3 chains, chain up 1 and pull a tail. So that is what your front panel should be looking like once you've finished the neckline. So we've still got that little one free, but that is fine because we'll be stitching that in later. There we go. Now we can stitch all the panels together. So now we've got all of our panels done. So I've got my front panel here, got the armholes and the neckline, and then I've got my 2 back panels which line up with the front panel. So they are going to lay over the top like that. So now we need to attach the shoulders and the underarms, and then we're going to work on connecting the back panels together with the ribbing. So the top is going to have a button and the bottom is going to have a tie, and you can decide if you want to use ties or you want to use buttons. I will tell you both ways how to do it. So if you want to put a button at the top, tie at the bottom, you can do whichever one you like. But first we have to stitch them together. So the most important thing is to make sure that all of the panels are facing the right way. So the easiest way to do that is to look at the first row of double crochets, because these do swap between being like the back side and the front side with each of the rows, but this one doesn't. So you can check, and this is the front. So I'm going to put my front panel down with the front facing up. I'm going to grab my back panels and put them with the front facing in, so good sides together. So here is the front side, so I have to flip it over, and then that one's going to go over there, and double check. So this is the good side, so I'm going to put that one down, and it all lines up. So to stitch up the panels, you're going to need to grab a darning needle, and I've already done this other side, so we will go over how to do that for this side. So I'm going to do the shoulder first, and I left the tail long enough to stitch it up, but if you haven't, that's all good. Just cut another piece of yarn and insert your needle. So making sure that it's right sides together, all you have to do is go through the top of each stitch and join them together. I'm going to line up each stitch. So this one is a 3 chain, counting as a double crochet. So I'm going to make sure that I go into the top of that 3rd chain, and I'm going to go into each stitch, lining up all the stitches. And I've gone into those first 5 doubles. So now I'm up to the chains, and if you have the 5 chains spare, we're going to join them together. If you don't have them spare, you can just keep stitching along the top of whatever stitches you do have there. So I'm not going to stitch into that first chain, I'm just going to stitch into the chains 2, 3, and 4 from that 5 chain row. So I'm going to go into that 2nd chain from one side and the 2nd chain from the other side, and just stitch them together like normal. And then into that next chain, the 3rd one along, and then the 4th one along. And now I'm back to the doubles. So I'm going to go into the top of that first double and the top of the double in the other panel, and just continue along. So this last one is into the top of the chains and that last stitch. And I'm going to do one more to secure and pull my yarn through. So there we go. Now you've got your shoulders connected. So I'm now going to do the side, which is much the same. I don't have yarn already connected, so I'm going to cut some. I normally do a little bit more than double just to be safe. Insert my needle. Now I'm just going to insert into the very bottom the chain row from both panels, and you can either just hold this in place, you can tie it to the other side, or you can tie it to itself, whatever you want to do. I might just put one little knot in here to hold it in place for now. And I'm going to go into every stitch. So just like we did for the top, but this time we're going to be going into the side of the stitches rather than the top of the stitches. If you like to make sure that it gets pulled evenly, you can pop a couple of stitch markers in. So I will put a stitch marker into the very top to make sure that it stays lined up, and then maybe another one in the middle somewhere, making sure that the rows are lining up. So you want to check that this row is lining up with the same row on the other side, and they are. So now you just go ahead and stitch into the side of those stitches. Try to line up the rows as best you can. It's a little bit harder without having sort of the top of the stitches, but just go all the way along until you get to the top, and then you can fasten off your yarn. Once you have stitched up your shoulders and your underarm, we're going to get started on the trim for the armhole. I've already done this side and I'm going to show you how to do the other side. It's exactly the same, but you do want to make sure that your top is facing with the right sides out. So this is the inside and this is the outside. You want to have it outside out. It's also a good idea to try your vest on now to make sure that the armholes aren't gaping. If they are gaping a little bit, you can pull it tighter by doing some extra decreases in the trim. Just space them around the front and the back of the arm, so on the sides rather than underneath. You're just going to go to where you've joined in your armpit. And I'm going to grab my yarn, make a slip knot. And I'm still using the same 4mm hook. I'm just going to insert my hook into where we connected the two panels, do a slip knot, and now I'm going to chain up 3. So just like for the rest of the row, this chain up of 3 is going to be the same height as our double crochets. So now I'm going to go along and do 1 double crochet into every stitch. So you'll just do it for as many of the columns that you have. Just go ahead and put slip stitches in the top of the column until you get close to the corner. So I only have a few double crochets to do before the corner. So just keep going until you are close to the corner. So going up this little bit here where we have the gap between the columns going up to the next column, I'm going to do 3 decreases. It doesn't matter if it's not in the exact same stitch that mine is in, but I'm going to do 1 decrease kind of right on that corner, 1 decrease on either side. So I'm going to do another double crochet, and so now I'm going to use this stitch and this stitch as the 2 kind of corner pieces to do a decrease. So I'm going to do a decrease into these 2 stitches here. So for a double crochet decrease, I'm just going to yarn over like normal, insert, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, and now straight away I'm going to yarn over, insert into the next stitch, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, and yarn over, pull through all 3 loops on the hook. So there's 1 double crochet decrease, and I'm going to do 2 more. So into that next stitch I'm going to insert, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, then yarn over into that next stitch, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, and yarn over, pull through all 3 loops on the hook. So 1 more double crochet decrease into those next 2 stitches, and there we go. So I've got 3 decreases in a row. Now I'm just going to go up the rest of the row with no more decreases. Because we're not going into the top of the column anymore, with the top of the column it's easy to see where the stitches from that previous row were. Now we're going into the side, so you'll need to do 2 double crochets into every double crochet. So I'm going to do 2 double crochets into each of the rows. So I'm going to do 1, 2 into that row, 3, 4 into that row, and keep going up. So there's no stitch count here because it'll depend on the size that you're making, but if you just make sure that you spread the double crochets out evenly, doing 2 into the end of every row or until you get all the way up to the shoulder. So I'm going to go ahead now and put 2 double crochets into the end of every row, and I'll join you back when I get to the shoulder because we're going to do one more decrease there. So now I'm almost up to the shoulder, so that's where I connected the 2 panels together over the shoulder, and into the stitches that are going to go between the 2 panels I'm going to put 1 decrease. Sometimes the shoulder can be a little bit, it'll stick up a little bit, so I'm just making sure that that doesn't happen. So into the last stitch that I'm going to do into this panel and the first stitch that I'm going to do into the other panel, I'm going to do a decrease. So just like we did before, I'm going to do my double crochet decrease. And there we go. So now you can continue on as normal, putting 2 double crochets into the end of every double crochet row. So keep going until you get up to the other side of the corner of the armpit. If you want to see those 3 decreases again, I will show you them there. And if you want to go ahead and finish off your arm, you can just keep doing the same thing that we did on the other side of the armpit. I'm almost back up to that corner of the armpit again. So I'm going to do my last couple of doubles. So just like we did on the other side, I'm going to do 3 decreases in total, 1 going over the corner and 1 on the other side. So I'm going to do my first decrease, and my second over that corner, and 1 more. Just to make sure that we don't have any gapping under the arm. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and put 1 double crochet in all of the remaining stitches. The side of the panel where you have the slip stitches is a little bit more difficult to stitch into just because it's very tight, but just anywhere in the top of the row will be fine. And 1 more into that last stitch on this side, and I'm going to do a slip stitch into that 3rd chain that we did, so the top of the 3rd chain, which was counting as our first double. I'm just going to do a slip stitch, chain up 1, pull a tail, and you can cut off your yarn and weave in the end. So there you have it. So now I'm going to do the trim for the neckline, and like I said before, there's a couple of options with this. You can make it so that you put a button at the top, or you can make it so that you have a tie. So whichever one you prefer to do, I'll show you both, but it's just a matter of preference. So if you want to do the version that has a tie, we are going to need to start off by making one end of the tie, then joining on, going all the way around, and then making the other end of the tie. So if you want to do that, you're going to grab your yarn, make a slip knot, and we are going to chain up 65. Once you've got your chain of 65, we are going to skip those first 3 chains from the hook, so that's going to count as our first stitch. So into the 4th chain from the hook, I'm going to do a double crochet. So yarn over, insert into that 4th chain from the hook, and double crochet. So now you could just go down the rest of the row, putting 1 double crochet into every chain. Here are the centimetre and inch measurements for the tie, but you could really make them as long or as short as you wanted. So join back in once you get to the end of the row. Once you've done your double crochets into all of those chains, you should have what looks kind of like a strap. So up until this point, this could be for around your waist as a waist tie, or for the one at the back of your neck. So it's identical for both. So if you're making the waist tie, you just go ahead and do that again, and then we attach it to the bottom of the top, but I will show you how to do that. So I've got my waist tie here. So if you want this to be a waist tie, we're just going to attach it to the bottom. If you wanted to be able to tie these waist ties all the way around yourself and tie them up at the front near your belly button, then I would recommend adding a couple more stitches. So I would say that the measurement should be, if you measure your waist, cut that in half at about 10 centimeters. That will be about the right length that you would need for this waist tie. If you want it to be a necktie, we're now going to continue with this and bring it all the way around. So I'll show you how to do that, and then I'll show you how to do it with a button instead. Basically, all we're going to do is do our next double crochet into the top of that first stitch. So this first stitch is the 3 chains from that row. So I'm just going to yarn over and insert into that 3rd chain and do a double crochet. We will need to come back in later and stitch this together, but that's not a problem. You can do that with the tail. So now I'm going to go ahead and put a double crochet into the top of every stitch from that top row of the back panel. So just like we did for the armpit, I'm going to do 3 decreases when we come to this corner. So I'm going to keep going with my double crochets. And I'm going to do my 3 decreases again. So 1 going across that kind of corner peak point, 1 on this side and 1 on the other side. So I'm just going to go ahead and do my first decrease. And another one. And last one. Great, so I've got my 3 decreases there. So as you can see, those decreases led us pretty much up to where our 2 panels are connected. So I'm going to go ahead and do another decrease straight away. So I'm actually going to have 4 in a row, but with the other sizes, you might not be this close to your shoulder. So if you're not, just go ahead and put 2 double crochets into the end of every double crochet row, like what we did for the arm trim. But if you're like me and you only have a couple stitches left, I'm going to go ahead and do 1 more decrease going across that corner, just like we did for the arm trim. And decrease. So now I'm going to go ahead and put 2 double crochets into the end of every double crochet row until I get to the next corner. And we're just going to do the same thing the whole way around. So we're going to do 3 decreases for this corner, get to the next corner, 3 decreases, 1 decrease over the shoulder, and then 3 decreases again, and then we'll get to the end. I am going to now jump over to how to do it with a buttonhole, which is essentially the same. So if you do want to see all those different decreases, stick around, because the button way to do it is the same as the tie way to do it. We're just not going to have the extra tie hanging off the end. So because I'm going to make mine with a button, I'm going to undo this now and show you how to do the buttonhole version instead. But once you get to this point, if you want to see the rest of the video, just follow the buttonhole one because it's the same. I will also show you how to finish off the neckline straps if you're using the strap version after we've done the buttonholes, but I'll leave all of the timestamps in the description box. Okay, so if you're making the neckline with the buttonhole, you just need to make sure that your vest is the right way out, so same as for the arm trim. I'm going to grab the end of my yarn, make a slip knot. And I'm going to chain up 5. So we're going to skip those first 3 chains as they count as a double crochet, and I'm going to do a double crochet into that 4th stitch from the hook, as well as that last chain, the 5th chain from the hook. So you should have 2 double crochets and the chain row. So now, similar to the ribbon one, I'm just going to do a double crochet into the top of that first stitch, which is the chains. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a regular double crochet into the top of that stitch, and we'll come back and sew this up later. So now I'm going to put 1 double crochet into the top of every stitch. So this is exactly the same as what I just showed you for the version doing it with the ribbon. So join back in when you get to the other side of the front panel. So in the other part of the video, I did the decreases here and the decrease over the shoulder. Join back in when you get up to here. So now I've just done my stitches over the corner and the join of the arms, and I'm up to that next corner. So I'm just going to do my 3 decreases again. So I'm going to do 1 on either side of the cornermost point, and then 1 on each side of that. And last one. Okay, so now I'm going to go across the front of the top, putting 1 double crochet into the top of every stitch. So this is like that bit under the armpit or at the back where you have the proper stitches to go into. We do have slip stitches going into the top of all these stitches, which makes it a little bit harder, but just find a spot for your hook. And just keep going until you get to the other side. Okay, so now I'm back to that next corner and I'm going to do my decreases again. So you can go ahead and do your 3 decreases here, your 1 decrease where the 2 shoulder pieces join, and your 3 decreases where this next V is, and join back in when you get up to the end. And I'm just doing my last double crochet into that last stitch. And I'm going to chain up 1, pull a tail, and cut my yarn. So no matter whether you're doing the button one or the ribbon one, you'll have to do this, because if we did a bunch of chains now and did our ribbon, it would be facing the wrong way. The double crochets would be facing the other way, which is a bit annoying. But either way, we're going to cut a tail. If you are doing the button version, we're now going to sew a button here. You'll probably need more of an actual sewing needle to be able to go through the hole in your button. Depends how big your button is, but probably it's not going to be huge. So I will grab a button and some thread and stitch on the button, and we're also going to need to sew this on. So I'll do that first actually. So just like we did before, just grab the end of that tail and stitch that together. So good sides together again. I'm just going to put a couple of stitches in here. So we've got our little edge there. So I'm going to sew the button onto this part, and you can use this to loop around your button. So the last thing to do is attach our button, and I've grabbed a bit of the cut off from my ends, and I'm just going to separate it to have 1 tiny little strand. If your yarn won't do this, that's totally fine. You can just use like a regular sewing machine thread, just a nice thin thread that's going to fit through your needle and through your button. I've got that threaded through my needle now, and I'm going to grab my little button, And onto the opposite side from where we have that little tab, you're just going to need to stitch your button on. So I'm going to come in through the back, and I'm going to make sure that I go through the fibers of the stitches that we did so that it doesn't just fall straight off or fall through the gaps. So I'm going to make sure that I go through. You don't have to sew it right on the edge if you don't want to, but I'm sewing it fairly close to the edge. Make sure that it's on there nice and firm and it's not going to fall off. And I'm just going to tie those strands at the back in a knot and then weave in my ends. Okay, and now you've got your button, so you can just slip that through some of the stitches from that little extra loop that we left. And that's why you need a small little button. So if you find that this is too loose around your neck, then you can just put it in between a couple of the double crochets instead. That's going to be totally fine, however it works for you. If you are doing the ribbon version, you're going to need to go ahead and make another ribbon like we did for the start or for the waist. So it's our 65 chains and then 1 double crochet into every stitch. So if you're doing the ribbon version, go ahead and make another one of these, and now we're going to join it on. This is going to be the same for the waist or the neckline. So for the waist, you'll need to make 2 of these, and one of them you'll be able to stitch it on using these tails. So one of them, the double crochets will line up and they'll all face the right way. But then on the other side, if you stitch it on with these, the double crochets would be facing different ways. If you don't mind that, that's totally fine and up to you. It doesn't look that different, but I just want all the stitches to be facing the same way. So I'm going to stitch it on from the other side. And if you are stitching onto the neck, that's what you're going to do here as well. So you just need to stitch that up to connect the two, and then you'll have a ribbon on either side. So I'm going to show you how to stitch it up, and I'm going to use the tail from when we started, but if you don't have a tail, you can just cut another piece of yarn, put that through the head of my needle. I'm going to grab the end and I'm going to put good sides together. That's the wrong one. So I've got my good sides together, and I'm just going to put a couple of stitches in here. It's only small, so you'll only need to do a couple of stitches. And a couple extra to secure it. And then you can weave in your end. Okay, so when you flip it back over, that's what it'll look like. You'll just have it stitched up in the corner, and that'll be the same at the top here. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and you found it useful. If you make any of my creations, please feel free to tag me on Instagram because I love to see what you've made. I'd also really appreciate it if you would consider hitting that subscribe button and the like button. See you in the next one.